The Galactic Interspecies Academy of Velthary Prime was home to 11,000 students from 47 different worlds. Only 31 of them were human. That number mattered, not because humans were rare in the galaxy, but because humans were terrifying. Not in the way predators were terrifying. Not in the way black holes were terrifying. Humans were terrifying in the specific, unsettling way that something is terrifying when it simply refuses to die. Every species at the academy knew the file. They'd all read the intake report during orientation. Death World Cadets, Biological Overview and Social Protocol. It had been written by the Velthary Xenopsychology Department after a series of what they diplomatically called incidents of alarming resilience. Every non-human student was strongly encouraged to read it. Most of them read it twice. Mara Ellison arrived at the academy on a Tuesday. She was 22 years old, 163 centimeters tall, and she had a scar that ran from her left eyebrow to her jaw, a souvenir from a climbing accident on Mount Logan when she was 16. She wore it the way humans wore all their damage, openly, without apology, as if scars were decoration rather than records of near-death. She was also the only human cadet enrolled in the advanced xenobiology track that semester. The other students noticed her immediately. Not because she announced herself. She didn't. Mara Ellison walked into the orientation hall with her duffel bag over one shoulder and her eyes moving across the room in that specific slow-scan way that predators used, cataloging exits, evaluating threats, mapping the space before committing to it. She probably wasn't aware she was doing it. The Velthary students near the door stepped back a full half-meter without realizing they'd moved. A Theron exchange student later described the experience in her personal log. She looked at me. Just looked. And my body understood something my brain hadn't caught up to yet, that this creature has survived a world that would kill me in 6 minutes. And she's smiling. Why is she smiling? Word spread fast. By the end of the first day, the unofficial protocol had been established without any formal announcement: give the human space. Don't engage unless she engages first. Do not make sudden movements. Do not stand behind her. And under absolutely no circumstances, do not touch her without warning. Mara noticed, of course. She was human. She noticed everything. She ate lunch alone. She sat in the back of lecture halls with empty seats on either side. She walked through corridors and students peeled away from her like water around a stone. She answered questions in seminar and her classmates listened with the careful, frozen attention of prey animals hoping to go unnoticed. She said nothing about it. She didn't complain, didn't push, didn't demand that anyone be comfortable with her presence. But at night, in her single-occupancy room, which she'd been given without explanation, she stared at the ceiling and felt the particular loneliness of someone who has been made into a myth before anyone has asked her name. Ethan Cross arrived 3 weeks later. He was a transfer from the Outer Rim campus, and he hadn't read the Xenopsychology department's file on Death World Cadets, not because it wasn't available, but because he'd been busy, and also because the title alone had made him roll his eyes so hard it had been briefly painful. He was 23, broad-shouldered in the way of someone who'd spent years doing physical labor rather than gym work, and he had the easy, unhurried manner of someone who had never particularly worried about what a room thought of him. He walked into the advanced xenobiology lab on his first day, looked around for an open seat, and found one next to Mara Ellison. He sat down. The entire room went quiet. Not conspicuously quiet. The kind of quiet that settles when everyone is very carefully pretending they aren't holding their breath. Ethan looked at his new seatmate. She was reading something on her datapad, shoulders slightly tight in the way of someone who was used to being watched and had learned to ignore it. She had a scar on her face that he found himself wanting to ask about, because it looked like it had a story. "Hey," he said. "I'm Ethan. Transfer from Rim campus. You're the other human, right?" Mara looked up. He was looking at her the way humans looked at each other, direct, unceremonious, no carefully maintained distance. Like she was just a person in a chair next to him, and the only relevant fact about that was whether she'd be annoying to sit next to for a 2-hour lab session. Something in her chest unknotted so fast it almost hurt. "Mara," she said. "Yeah. Only one in this track. How's that been?" She considered lying. It was a reflex, the same reflex that had made her say fine when people asked how she was doing after the Logan accident, after the field deployment in Manitoba, after the half-dozen other things that had left marks on her body or her sleep. "Quiet," she said instead. "Very quiet." Ethan glanced around the room, at the careful berth everyone else was giving them, at the subtle repositioning that had occurred when he'd sat down, at the way an entire population of alien students had apparently agreed without discussion to leave a meter of empty space around a single human woman. "Huh," he said, with the mild, curious tone of someone filing information away. Then he turned back to her. "Well, I never know what to do with quiet." He didn't make a big thing of it. That was the part that mattered. He didn't perform friendliness for the benefit of onlookers. He didn't announce himself as some kind of ambassador of human approachability. He just sat next to her. Shared notes. Asked her to explain the section of the reading he'd missed. Complained about the cafeteria's interpretation of coffee with the specific, aggrieved passion that only humans brought to caffeine-related grievances. He asked about the scar on the third day. "Climbing accident," she told him. "Mount Logan. I was 16 and very stupid." "Did you finish the climb?" She looked at him sidelong. "Yeah. Of course." He nodded, like that was the only sensible answer. "What's the hardest thing you've climbed?" And she told him. And then he told her about the time he'd spent 2 weeks doing geological survey work on a tidal moon where the weather changed every 6 hours, and they were 20 minutes into an enthusiastic argument about which Earth mountain range produced better technical climbers when Mara realized, with a small shock of sensation, that she had entirely forgotten to monitor the exits. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing real ever does. But students noticed Ethan Cross sitting with Mara Ellison. They noticed that she laughed at something he said in the lab, a short, genuine laugh, the kind that couldn't be performed. They noticed that he handed her equipment without the careful, theatrical slowness that everyone else used, and that she took it without comment, and that neither of them seemed to find this remarkable. A Theron student named Veloshari approached Mara in the library on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Ethan's arrival. She sat down across from her, at a normal distance, not the careful half-meter of before, and said, with the blunt directness of her species, "I have been watching how the human male interacts with you." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Okay. He does not appear to be afraid." "He's not." "Why not?" Mara considered the question. "Because he decided not to be," she said finally. "That's generally how it works with us." Veloshari was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "May I sit here? I have a question about the enzymatic cascade in Chapter 7. "Sure," Mara said. She didn't look up from her reading, but her shoulders dropped a centimeter. The way they did when something held in too long was finally, carefully set down. By the end of semester, Ethan Cross had accumulated a study group that contained 2 Theron, a Velthari, and a being from the Rim Collective who communicated in patterns of bioluminescence and had taken a deep scholarly interest in human profanity. Mara Ellison had a table in the cafeteria where people sat with her, sometimes loudly, sometimes for hours. She still sat with her back to the wall. She still scanned rooms when she entered them. She still had the careful alertness of something shaped by a world that had never promised to be gentle. But she laughed more. And she stopped counting exits before she counted people. It turned out those 2 things were connected. Later, in a xenosociology thesis on interspecies integration at mixed species academies, a Velthari doctoral student would write, "The breakthrough did not come from policy reform, cultural education programs, or formal interspecies dialogue. It came from a single student who sat down next to someone everyone else had decided was frightening, and simply started talking. When asked why, the student said she was sitting alone. That seemed like the actual problem. This researcher submits that humans may be the only species in the known galaxy for whom the solution to a complicated social situation is sometimes just show up.